That's generous considering. Those were the exact words my father said at my nursing graduation dinner. Not congratulations, not I'm proud of you. Just that. And before I tell you what happened next, I want to know where you're watching from today. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and if you're new here, please subscribe, because what my father said that night was only the beginning of something I never saw coming. My name is Cecily, and for 4 years, I had imagined what that dinner would feel like. I thought my father would stand up when I walked in. I thought he'd take a photo without being asked. I thought maybe, just this once, he'd look at me the way he looked at things he was actually proud of. The way he looked at my stepbrother's school trophies displayed in a row on the shelf in the living room, or at the new Volvo he'd parked in the driveway that same year. I thought after 4 years of nursing school, after every clinical placement, an overnight shift, an 18-hour day, he might finally see what I had managed to build out of nothing. I was wrong about that. I'd been wrong about it before, so I should have known. My mother died when I was 12 years old. Ovarian cancer, caught late, gone by the following June. She was 38. I have fragments of her, the way you have fragments of a dream. The smell of the lotion she kept beside the bathroom sink, the way she hummed when she cooked, a photograph my grandmother keeps on the sideboard in the front hall. After she died, my father raised me, if you can call it that. He was present in the legal sense. There was food, and there was a roof, and there was school registration every September. Love was harder to locate. He remarried when I was 15. My stepmother wasn't deliberately unkind. She just treated me the way some people treat a piece of furniture that belonged to a previous owner. Politely, from a distance, without any real interest in where it came from. My stepbrother, her son with my father, was 7 years younger than me. He too went to a private school on the west side of Hamilton. I went to the public high school 3 blocks from our house. It never once occurred to me to ask why there was a difference. I assumed my father could afford one and not the other. I assumed it was my job to make do. When I got into the nursing program at McMaster University, I called my grandmother first. She cried so hard I had to tell her 3 separate times before she actually heard it. My father, when I called him, said, "You know that's not a cheap program." That was his version of "I'm proud of you." I applied for OSAP the same week I got my acceptance letter. My father sat across from me at his kitchen table and told me his finances were complicated. His word, complicated, and that he couldn't contribute much. He said it the way people say things that are unfortunate but impossible to change, like bad weather. I nodded and told him it was fine. I went home and started doing math. The 4 years that followed were the kind of years I don't talk about at parties, because they're not interesting to hear about, only to survive. I worked part-time at a long-term care home in the east end of Hamilton every weekend. In my 3rd year, when my loan disbursements weren't covering rent, I added overnight shifts, finishing at 6 in the morning and going directly to clinical placement without sleeping. I bought the no-name brand of everything at Loblaws, because it was cheaper than the President's Choice, and cheaper still than anything with a proper label. I calculated my Presto card balance before the end of every month. I had a spreadsheet for groceries that I updated every Sunday night. I told myself there was dignity in it. I told myself I was doing it on my own, and that meant something. By the time I graduated with my Bachelor of Science in Nursing, I had just under $60,000 in student debt. The pinning ceremony was on a Thursday afternoon, held in the university's convocation hall with low ceilings and good acoustics. My cohort of 43 nurses filed in single file while our families took photos from the rows of seats along the walls. My grandmother had come from Dundas on the bus. She'd never liked driving into the city, wearing a gray wool coat she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She had the look on her face that she wore at important moments, a kind of concentrated pride, like she was trying to memorize everything. My father arrived 7 minutes after it started. He found a seat near the back and spent most of the ceremony with his phone angled slightly downward in his lap, which was how he looked at his phone when he was trying to make it seem like he wasn't. I noticed. I always noticed things like that with him. After, we went to a restaurant on King Street. My grandmother had chosen it, a mid-range Italian place with white tablecloths and a good pasta. My father had eaten before coming, he said, and ordered just a coffee. My stepmother hadn't come, she'd sent a card, he told me, which I never received. I was wearing my nursing pin on the lapel of my blazer. My grandmother touched it lightly when she sat down beside me, the way you'd touch something precious. My father didn't mention it. We ordered. My grandmother asked about my job prospects and I told her I had 2 interviews lined up the following week. Both in Hamilton, one at a hospital and one at a community health center. She listened to everything I said with the kind of attention that my father had stopped giving me somewhere around the time I turned 15. When the dessert plates arrived, my father slid an envelope across the table toward me. No ceremony. He didn't say, "Look at this," or "I wanted you to have something." He just pushed it forward with his left hand while signaling the waiter with his right. "For graduation," he said. I opened it. Inside was a check for $200 and a handwritten note. "Proud of you, this should help you get started." $200, after 4 years, after $60,000 in loans. I held the check and looked at it long enough that my grandmother reached over and covered my hand with hers. "Thank you," I said. He nodded, already looking elsewhere. Then, without any apparent awareness of what he was saying or how it would land, he added, "That's generous considering." I said, "Considering what?" He set down his coffee cup. "Considering everything it costs to raise you. 6 years clothes, food, school fees. It adds up, Cecily." Someone at the table beside us stopped talking. I felt the heat climb straight up the back of my neck. "I know," I said carefully. "You'll be fine now. You're a nurse. That's a stable income." He said it with the mild finality of a man closing a folder on his desk, as if the subject of me had been neatly concluded. My grandmother had not moved. She sat with her hands folded in front of her and looked at my father with an expression I had never seen on her before. It was older than anger. It looked like a decision being made slowly, and too late, and with a great deal of weight behind it. She didn't say anything at the restaurant. She waited until we were in the parking lot, and my father had already pulled out in his Volvo, and the tail lights had rounded the corner. Then she said, "Are you free this Sunday?" I told her yes. "Come to my house, just you. Don't tell your father you're coming." I looked at her. The parking lot lights turned everything a pale yellow. Her eyes were wet. My grandmother had not cried since my mother's funeral. "What's going on?" I asked. She shook her head once. "There's something I should have told you years ago. I thought I didn't need to. I told myself everything was being handled properly." She reached up and pressed her palm briefly to my cheek. "I was wrong. I'm sorry it took this long." She got into her car. I stood in the parking lot for another minute with the envelope in my hand, trying to understand what had just changed and why it felt irreversible. I drove to Dundas on Sunday morning. It's a small town at the edge of Hamilton, tucked into the Niagara Escarpment, and my grandmother had lived there in the same bungalow since before I was born. The house had a red front door and a garden she kept meticulously and a smell inside. Cedar and a specific fabric softener. That meant safety to me, the way certain smells do when you encounter them for the first time in a decade. She was waiting at the window when I pulled into the driveway. That was unusual. She usually came to the door only when she heard the car in the gravel, I noticed. She made tea without asking if I wanted any. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I had done homework at 8 years old, where I had eaten Christmas dinner every year since my mother died. And she placed her hands flat on the surface between us, and looked at me with the careful expression of someone about to say something they cannot unsay. "Your mother made a plan before she died," she said. My hands went still around my mug. "She knew she wasn't going to recover. She was clear-eyed about it even at the end, your mother. She had a life insurance policy. She'd carried it since before you were born, and she updated her will after she got the diagnosis." My grandmother's voice was measured, but her jaw was tight. "She set up a trust. A testamentary trust, the lawyer called it. The insurance money would go into the trust after she died, and it would be held for you until you turned 25, enough to cover your entire education and leave you something for a start in life." I said very quietly, "I didn't have a trust." "Your father was named trustee." She met my eyes. "He was responsible for managing the funds on your behalf and releasing them to you as needed." The word trustee sat in my chest, like something that had just cooled and hardened. "I have $60,000 in student debt," I said. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they held the specific grief of someone who has understood something too late. "I know," she said. "I didn't know that until you mentioned it last year. I believed that the trust was covering your schooling. I thought that was where the money was going, toward your tuition, your housing, your books. I didn't ask because I trusted your father. He was my daughter's widower. I had no reason to think he wasn't doing what she wanted." She looked down at her hands. I should have asked. I'm sorry. She stood and went to the cabinet beside the refrigerator. From behind a set of mixing bowls she pulled out a manila envelope, old and soft at the corners from years of handling. She set it between us. Your mother gave me copies of the trust documents before she died. She said, keep these somewhere safe, Mum, just in case. I put them in this cabinet and told myself there would be no just in case, that your father would handle everything the way he was supposed to. She pushed the envelope toward me. I'm sorry it took me this long to open it again. Inside were photocopied trust documents, a copy of my mother's will with her signature at the bottom, and a letter in her handwriting, 3 paragraphs long, on paper that had yellowed slightly at the folds. It began, Cecily, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped. I could not read past that line. I folded the letter and set it aside very carefully. The trust documents showed the amount that had been set aside for me. I looked at the number for a long time. It was enough to have carried me through 4 years at McMaster without borrowing a single dollar. Enough to have left something remaining on the other side. I sat at my grandmother's table and felt something fundamental shift in the way I understood the last 4 years of my life. I drove home with copies of everything in a folder on my passenger seat and spent that night cross-referencing every OSAP notice and tuition receipt and loan statement I had kept in a shoebox at the back of my closet. I was looking for anything that connected my education to that trust account, a reference number, a payment notation, a single deposit that matched the timing. There was nothing. A friend of mine, someone I've known since secondary school who works now at a credit union in Hamilton, agreed to meet me at a coffee shop on Locke Street 2 days later. She went through the documents carefully and without judgment. When she finished, she told me the same thing I already half knew. I needed the actual account statements. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every record of where the money had gone. I could obtain those through a formal request, either from the financial institution directly or through a lawyer. Before I went to a lawyer, I went to see my father. I texted him on a Tuesday afternoon and said I was in the area. He said fine. My stepmother was at the kitchen island when I arrived reading something on her tablet. My father was in the living room watching television. We talked about ordinary things, my job applications, the weather, whether I was looking for an apartment closer to wherever I'd end up working. Then, as casually as I could manage, I said, I was looking at some of Mom's old papers that Grandma had, documents from when she died. My father looked up from the television. What kind of documents? He said. Her will mostly. I didn't know she'd set up a trust. Something happened to the air in the room. I'd been watching for it. My stepmother stopped scrolling. My father set down his remote. Where did your grandmother get those? He asked. Mom gave them to her. Copies for safekeeping. I was just curious. I didn't know there was money set aside for my education. I had OSAP for everything. You're getting into things you don't understand, he said. Maybe, I said, but I went through school on $60,000 in loans, if there was a trust. I raised you for 6 years, he said, and his voice had tightened now. I clothed you and fed you and kept you in school. Do you have any idea what that costs? I know what it costs, I said. I'm asking about the trust account. My stepmother rose from her stool and came to stand beside him. Cecily, she said carefully, this feels like an accusation. I'm asking a question, I said. My father stood up. After everything I did for you, you come into my house and do this. Fine, but I don't owe you any explanation. He didn't deny the trust existed. He went straight to defense. I drove home knowing that whatever the records showed, I was going to need a lawyer. The lawyer my grandmother recommended specialized in estates and trusts. She had a quiet office on the edge of downtown Hamilton, and the particular manner of someone who has seen a great many families discover difficult things about each other. She reviewed my mother's trust documents, my OSAP records, and the letter I'd found in the envelope. Then she told me, in plain and careful language, what the law said. My father, as trustee, had legal obligations under Ontario's Trustee Act. He was required to manage the funds solely for my benefit, keep proper accounting, and be able to account for every dollar. Any use of those funds for personal purposes, for expenses unrelated to my welfare, would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. It could give rise to civil liability. We could seek recovery through his personal assets if necessary. She filed a formal request for the trust's complete financial records. The statements arrived 4 weeks later. She called me into her office and had them laid out across the desk in order when I arrived. The trust account had once held a sum that made me grip the arms of my chair when I saw it. Then she walked me through the withdrawals. They began in the year after my mother died. Small amounts at first. Amounts that could have plausibly been expenses for a child. Then they grew. There was a recurring annual payment that matched the tuition schedule at my stepbrother's school. A lump sum in the July of a year I recognized because that was the summer my father had taken his new family to Europe. I hadn't been invited, and he told me finances were tight. There were mortgage payments. There was a large single withdrawal that corresponded within weeks to the year my stepmother had gotten a new vehicle. I turned the pages slowly. I was looking for my name, for any notation that connected those funds at education or my life, a tuition payment, a loan repayment, a housing stipend, anything. My name did not appear, not once in the entire history of that account. By the final statement, there was almost nothing left. I thought about the semester I ate instant noodles for 3 weeks because I'd calculated wrong and come up short on groceries. I thought about the November morning in 3rd year when I worked an overnight shift at the care home, came home, showered, and went directly to an 8-hour clinical rotation running on 4 hours of sleep, spread across 2 days. I thought about calling my father during 2nd year, short on rent, and him saying, his exact words, "I wish I could help more, but things are tight." Things were tight. I walked to my car after that appointment and sat in the parking structure off Main Street for a while. Then I called my grandmother and told her what the records showed. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "I should have asked years ago," she said finally. "You trusted him," I said. "Mom trusted him. You didn't have any reason to think you needed to check." She went quiet again. When she spoke, her voice had steadied into something practical. She asked what came next. I told her about formal demands for repayment, about the possibility of civil action if he refused, about the lien options my lawyer had mentioned. Then she said, "Before any of that, I want to have everyone over for dinner." I understood what she meant. She told my father it was to properly celebrate my graduation, since the dinner afterward had been rushed. She said she wanted to do it right, a proper family meal. He confirmed he'd come. My stepbrother said he'd be there too. She made a full Sunday dinner, roast chicken and roasted potatoes and green beans with slivered almonds, the kind of dinner she reserved for Christmas. The kitchen smelled the way it always had, and the table was set with the good plates she kept for occasions. My father sat where he always sat when he came to her house. My stepbrother was at the end closest to the window. My stepmother next to my father, my grandmother across, me at the other end with a folder on the floor beside my chair. Dinner was almost entirely normal. My grandmother asked my stepbrother about his plans. He was finishing his final year of high school and had applied to universities in Ottawa and Toronto. My father talked about a case at work. My stepmother mentioned they were thinking of updating the kitchen. When the plates were cleared and my grandmother had put shortbread on the table, I reached down and picked up the folder. "There's something I need to talk about," I said. My father saw the folder. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but in the way faces shift when something recognized appears unexpectedly. I placed the first page on the table. The trust document, my mother's name at the top. Mom set up a trust for me before she died. I think most people at this table knew that. I didn't. My stepmother's face went very still. I placed the account summary on the table. Then the withdrawal history my lawyer had prepared. Dates, amounts, descriptions laid out clearly on a single sheet. Private school tuition, I said, 12 years of it, a European trip, mortgage payments, a vehicle purchase. I kept my voice steady. I'd been practicing this for 2 weeks. None of it connected to my education. None of it connected to me. My stepbrother picked up the withdrawal sheet and looked at it. I watched him understand it. It moved across his face the way weather moves across a sky. Slowly at first, then all at once. "Dad," he said quietly. My father pushed back from the table. "This is an ambush." "It's a dinner table," I said. "You've let your grandmother fill your head with." "I have the bank records," I said. "I have $60,000 in student loans. I have 4 years of OSAP statements, and I have a lawyer." He stood. His chair scraped hard against the kitchen floor. "After everything I provided for you." "I know what you provided," I said. "I also know what you took." My grandmother spoke then, for the first time since I'd opened the folder. She didn't raise her voice. She barely moved. "You were her trustee," she said. "My daughter trusted you with her daughter's future." My father looked at her with something complicated and unresolved in his face. For just a moment, I thought it might turn into something honest. Instead, he picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. My stepbrother's voice came out quieter than I expected. Dad, did you actually use her school money? My father walked to the front door without answering. My stepmother followed. The door closed. We heard the car on the gravel, and then the street, and then nothing. My stepbrother stayed at the table. He sat with the withdrawal sheet in front of him for a long time. The private school tuition entries were listed clearly. 12 years of them. I didn't know, he said. I knew Dad paid for school, I knew it was expensive, but I assumed he was paying from his salary. I never thought to ask where it came from. He looked at me. I'm sorry, Cecily, I'm genuinely sorry. I reached over and touched his arm. I meant it. He was 17 years old and none of this was his doing. My grandmother and I sat at the table after he left. The shortbread was untouched. The tea went cold. Neither of us needed to say very much. Some things sit with you in silence more honestly than they would in words. My father's lawyer contacted mine within the month. After reviewing the trust records and receiving a formal assessment of his legal exposure, they advised him to settle, rather than proceed to court. The negotiation took 2 months. The agreement secured repayment of a significant portion through a lien on property. Not everything my mother had left me, because some of it had been spent in ways that couldn't be traced and recovered, and no settlement could give back the overnight shifts or the years of loan anxiety, or the breakfast I skipped in second year because I'd run short. But it was substantial, and it was officially, legally acknowledged. That mattered to me in a way that was difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't spent years being told they were asking for too much. I paid off my student loans in a single payment the morning the settlement cleared. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and processed the transfer, and then I sat there for a while doing nothing, just feeling what $60,000 of debt lifting felt like. My grandmother called me the week after everything was finalized and asked me to come to Dundas. She sat me down in the living room, not the kitchen this time, the living room, which she used for serious things, and told me she had updated her will. She was leaving me the bungalow. She said, "This has nothing to do with your father or what he did. This is about you. This is about the fact that your mother raised a person worth knowing, and I want to make sure you always have somewhere that belongs to you." I didn't know what to say. I sat there for a moment. She said, "Your mother would have done exactly this herself, if she'd had the time." I enrolled in the nurse practitioner program that fall. No second job, no overnight shifts, no Sunday night spreadsheets, counting how many transit trips I could afford before the next disbursement. I paid my tuition, and I bought my textbooks, and I ate properly, and I slept more than 4 hours on clinical days. It felt strange for a while, the absence of that particular kind of exhaustion. Then it felt like what things were supposed to be. My stepbrother started at university in Ottawa in September. He texted me on his first day and said he was nervous and didn't know anyone. I told him that was exactly how it was supposed to feel, and that it got better quickly. We text occasionally now. It's cautious and small, our relationship, but it's real. Whatever happened between our parents has nothing to do with him, and I don't intend to make him pay for it. The $200 check from my graduation dinner is framed and hanging above my desk at home, next to my mother's letter in its frame beside it. I did not frame the check out of bitterness. I framed it because of what it represents. The moment a door opened that my father had spent 12 years keeping shut. He had looked at me across a restaurant table and implied I should feel lucky to receive $200. He had said it was generous considering. He had spent those same years spending my mother's money on everything except me, and then made me feel like the problem was my ingratitude. He was wrong. He had been wrong from the beginning. My mother had known me for only 12 years. 12 years, and she had loved me with enough forethought to sit down with a lawyer while she was dying and make arrangements for a future she knew she wouldn't be there to see. She had signed documents and named a trustee, and believed, the way dying mothers believe things, that the people she left behind would protect what she built. That's the thing I carry now, above everything else. Not the settlement, though the settlement mattered. Not the nurse practitioner program, though it matters too. It's the knowledge that my mother planned for me. That she thought I was worth protecting. That somewhere in the legal language, and the signed pages, and the yellowed documents in my grandmother's cabinet, there is a record of someone who looked at the future, and made sure I would have one. She wasn't wrong about me. She just chose the wrong person to trust with the plan. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you'd been in my position, if you'd found out that someone had spent years quietly using what was yours while letting you struggle, what would you have done? Would you have gone straight to the lawyers, confronted them directly, or tried to walk away and put it behind you? Tell me in the comments. And if you're new to Family Shadows, subscribe. Every story here is about the family truths that stay hidden for too long, and the moment someone finally decides to stop pretending they don't know.